Hey everybody, KC here. So there was a really interesting piece in Fast Company the other day by a branding guy named James Vincent, in which he was talking about what separates a good founder of a business from a great one. And what he writes is every entrepreneur wants to create a company that's successful and beloved by consumers in the long term, but the vast majority of startups get stuck. And in my experience, he writes, lose their way before the 3 to 5 year mark. He says, I've had the privilege of working with many great leaders, including Steve Jobs at Apple and Brian Chesky, the co-founder and CEO of Airbnb, and a number of others. And what he says is that the founders who've made the transition from seed to greatness approach their business with intention, and they won't compromise on lofty aspirations, even if it means taking a short-term hit. Important point. They've shown the necessity, he says, of being fearless in vision and ruthless in execution. And he presents 5 different lessons, and I wanted to share those with you here. First of all, they build a story, something we're big fans of here at Morning Newsbeat. What he writes is, founders have the absolute need to tell their story multiple times a day, and so it's a skill you must perfect. Is your elevator pitch truly unique and compelling? Can you tell your story in 30 seconds or less, describe what you stand for, and get people to care about the unique social contract you build with your users? In other words, what makes you different? And I would ask that question of every business, every retailer. Can you say in 30 seconds what makes you different from everybody else you compete with? Important question. Number 2, they bring voice to their vision. He writes that voice is as much the why and the how as the what of a company. If a business is a rational equation, we like to think a brand voice is its beating heart. The founder's opportunity is to build from their experience to craft a unique company, unlike those that have come before them. And again, the whole idea of being unique, being differentiated, incredibly important. Number 3, they never forget that the product is a brand. He writes, I learned this lesson personally through more than a decade working closely with Steve Jobs. Apple is widely considered to be one of the world's most product-driven companies. But every time a product was developed, Steve would ask, what is the brand deposit? He wanted to know, how is it furthering that overarching idea of Apple's brand? And listen, I think that's something we've written about a lot over the years on Morning Newsbeat, right? With every decision you make, are you reinforcing or furthering your basic value proposition? Incredibly important thing to do. Number 4, they make the tough calls. With all the pressure on startups, he writes, it's easy to embrace short-term revenue goals and the never-ending iterations instead of remembering your intentions and starting the business. Sticking to the things you do well and owning your decisions. Founders have to know when to say no, even if there's a quick buck to be involved. And short-term revenue, you've got to be able to say no if by saying no, you're actually saying yes to the furtherance of your brand proposition, as opposed to say outsourcing all your online deliveries. But that's, I digress. And finally, he says, be clear about your role in the world. He writes, you certainly don't have to know it all at the very beginning, but in my experience, great founders often have an early, strong sense of how they want to make what Steve Jobs famously called a, quote, dent in the universe, unquote. When you have a mission of using tech to create something constructive and important to humanity, he writes, we believe it's the founder's responsibility to see that through, even at the expense of some tough growth calls. And I think these are all really, really important points, but I would make one additional one, which is this is not just about tech, and it's certainly not just about startups. Even mature companies, in fact, especially mature companies, I would argue, they need to know their story. They need to have that narrative. They need to be clear about their voice and their vision, and they have to be disciplined about constantly advancing their brand and their sense of mission. Don't do those things, and I don't care if you're a company that's a year old or 50 years old, you're in big trouble. And these things have to be top of mind every day. Anyway, that's what's on my mind this morning. And as always, I want to hear what's on your mind.